Hello everybody, Ben Rogers here, the Raptors Digest. Riker, there's been great debate amongst Raptors fans, probably the Raptors coaching staff as well. Who will be in the playoff rotation? We have about 7 locks. Jack Armstrong mentioned it on the last game, but we know that Kyle Lowry, Danny Green, Kawhi Leonard, Pascal Siakam, Marc Gasol, Serge Ibaka, and Fred VanVleet are locks. There's no debate on those 7 players. I think we both agree. I think everyone that's listening agrees, but there's a few guys on the roster that are going to be fighting for the scraps, fighting for those playoff minutes. Riker, if you want to take us away with those 4 or 5
Well, before
players.
we start, Ben, we're going to plug this every podcast until it sticks. We're on the traditional podcast platforms right now. We might be on iTunes by the time this rolls out, but we're definitely on Google Play. We're definitely on Spotify. Check it out. You've been asking for it. We're excited about it. So check out all those platforms. We'll link it in the description. But you're right. It's been a point of absolute consideration, absolute debate. We don't really know how the ball is going to roll now coming into playoff time because it's been such an up and down season for the bench unit.
Yep.
And the last couple of games, they have not in any capacity been able to hold their own against, opposite starting lineups or even the opposite benches and even the secondary bench units in the Magic game. If you remember that, I was absolutely baffled at how poor the performance was. So we can break it down however you want, player by player. We can break it down overall. What things, let's start it off this way. Let's start general and then maybe narrow in our scope. My first question to you, Ben, is what are we looking for? Because let's say 7 people are indeed a lock. And let's go on the hypothesis that my point about liking an 8-man rotation is what probably could be played. I mean, of course, there could be a 9th and 10th man, but let's assume we're just really first talking about the 8th man. What are we looking for? If Serge Ibaka and VanVleet are the locks, what does the final player need to be able to provide in order to get those minutes?
Well, obviously the Toronto Raptors, it's been a key all season being able to knock down the three-point shot at a relatively consistent basis. When the Toronto Raptors are knocking down threes, it seems like the offense runs so much more fluidly, we win more games, and everything just looks a whole lot better. And the unfortunate thing with the bench unit, as you mentioned, the inconsistencies, particularly from shooting and putting the ball in the hoop, has really just made them not very effective against a lot of second units in a lot of games this season, which has been very unfortunate. So, we have a lot of guys on the bench that are capable of shooting the ball, but the consistency has been a question mark. And I want to name the 5 players just before we get into it. They're Norman Powell, Jody Meeks, Jeremy Lin, OG Anunoby, and Patrick McCaw. I think of the 5 players that are really fighting to get those last scrap of minutes. Obviously, OG is currently injured, and Patrick McCaw has that thumb injury and might not be back for the beginning of the playoffs. So, what are you looking for out of one of these 5 players? As obviously Boucher and Miller haven't really been in the rotation at all this season. Of course. What are you looking for out of these guys?
You're saying 3-point shooting. You're saying the big, because like I said, 8th man, that'll definitely need to be a position that's filled. You're not going to run a 7-man rotation for the entire playoff stretch. So you're going to need an 8th player at least, maybe a 9th player. So you're saying that it comes down to the 3-point shooting, probably the best 3-point shooter. I would maybe agree with that. I think that offense is really a big thing because not just because you need a scorer out there. I think that that's kind of irrelevant with the variety of players that you have on this team. That burden is going to be held by any of the starters really, or even Serge Ibaka, and then to an extent even Fred VanVleet. Yeah. But what they need to be is at least a credible enough threat that they're drawing their own defender away from the primary guys. So that makes total sense.
Yep.
What else I want to see is consistency and reliability, and that's going to be a thing that I don't think there's enough games left for a player to prove now beyond what they already have out of the 5 guys that you mentioned. Because our biggest issue with Jeremy Lin, for example, is that, in flashes he shows that he's good, but then in flashes, just from the eye test, he's really not, even though his stats are kind of showing that he's all right, he's not a guy that you'd really want out there in playoff minutes. You're fine to throw him out there in the garbage minutes in the final quarter when there's, kind of the bad players are out. But I want a guy that's out there and you can at least rely on him to do whatever it is that you want him to do as the 5th player out there on the court.
Certainly. You bring up the point of consistency because that's been an issue for a lot of these players. But I think the player that's had the highest highs this season has been Norman Powell. And he comes off the bench. He's more of a slasher. His game is all about attacking the rim. He can knock down the threes when he's feeling good. Obviously, all 5 of these players are very strong defenders, so that's not really going to be a point of contention because they all can guard on the defensive end of the floor. But so we're probably going to focus more so on the offensive end in this podcast. But Norman Powell, he's shown out for very big games this season, whether it be shooting threes, mid-range, finishing at the rim, but there's other games where he turns over the ball, he goes out of control towards the rim, and he clanks his open shots. So I think he's the most inconsistent, so to speak, but provides the highest highs.
He does because he has the most points, 8.5 points per game in his 56 games this season. Yep. He's shooting at the highest level, 47%. He's shooting the best three-point percentage besides Jody Meeks in his 6th game at 38% from the 3. But he's tied for the highest turnovers out of the 5 guys that we've mentioned. So you're right, and it goes beyond stats. Really, Norman Powell, anybody who's watched the game, you're exactly right. He has flashes where he's a guy that can put up 20 points.
Yep.
And he's looking really fantastic. And then he has flashes where it seems like he's trying to take on too much. He gets caught up in the pace of the game. He doesn't know how to sort of steady himself. His dribble moves are out of control. His IQ is questionable. So I think if you were to get a consistent Norman Powell, I would have no problem playing with him or playing him throughout the playoffs. I don't see him being played, though, and just because of the things that I mentioned.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. We'll obviously make our conclusions at the end of the podcast, but Norman Powell's also been shown that he's a playoff performer. He had that phenomenal Bucks series. He absolutely saved us Game 5 against Indiana his rookie year, so that might play a factor in getting the playoff minutes, at least at the start of it, if he can run with opportunity. But I think the second most talked about player, especially before he went down with injury, was OG Anunoby. And he's a guy that showed out in the playoffs last season, did phenomenal against the Washington Wizards, was obviously our starting small forward for all of last season. And, he did a very good job at guarding LeBron James in the second round last year and had some big playoff moments, hit some clutch shots. And this year, he hasn't taken the step forward like we liked. And we've talked about OG Anunoby a lot this season. There's been a lot of ups and downs, whether it be injuries, personal stuff, and all that. But OG, when it comes to play, you want your most effective players on the court. And even though his shooting is sometimes a bit inconsistent, and he's averaging 7 points per game this season, shooting about 34% from the 3-point line, we know what we're going to get out of OG in terms of the defensive ability. He's a bit bigger than the rest of these players, and he's not going to force anything. The unfortunate thing with Norman Powell is when things aren't going good, he still likes to force it at the rim, and there's no margin for error in the playoffs. OG, when the shots aren't going down and things aren't going his way, he's not going to be a negative. He's not going to force dumb shots. He's not going to, drive into the rim and make turnovers. So OG's a very kind of enigma on the court in terms of whether he'll play or not.
But come playoff time, you're not necessarily looking for a spark from an 8th guy, but his pros is that you're right, he is a bigger guy, so in a matchup against the Bucks it could be crucial, for example, or against the 76ers,
be
against
able to
big
switch
teams
and defense.
Exactly, 100%. But his cons is also that you know what you're getting. You know that he's not going to force a shot, and that is also to his detriment because of his attitude is passive, and he doesn't really command a lot of attention on offense, and his confidence is, I don't think that his confidence is really an issue, but just something about his demeanor out on the court, I think that's going to hold him back from necessarily playing big minutes into the playoffs, because he doesn't really prove to me when he's out there that he's hungry, that he wants to stay out on the court. He just kind of plays loafishly, like he plays like Kawhi Leonard played on the San Antonio Spurs, but without all the the offense,
the extreme talent. Yeah,
exactly.
So certainly he's been kind of wild this season. Some people there's wide-ranging opinions on OG Anunoby. Obviously, I fall higher on the spectrum of in favor of OG, but we can't have him making young player mistakes, not being a threat on the court. So it's going to be interesting to see what Nick Nurse does. I personally see OG definitely getting an opportunity in the playoffs, and especially with how he played last year, and if he can run with it, it's going to be interesting to see. But a guy that we've talked a lot about as well, Jeremy Lin. He's a player we've made countless videos on, and he was when he was picked up by the Toronto Raptors, although we have although we have Fred VanVleet and Kyle Lowry, who are also two shorter guards, but we thought Jeremy Lin would at least be in the playoff rotation with his ability to slash, his ability to create, and also be a great defender, but he's been very underwhelming in terms of shooting the ball, and, the Raptors don't run a lot of pick and roll. We have so many ball handlers on this team. He's not going to get the opportunity to have the ball in his hands for a lot of stretches, and he's shown that he's not very capable of playing off the ball, especially with his size and all that sort of stuff. So he's been underwhelming. Riker, we talked about Norman Powell, we talked about OG. What do you see Jeremy Lin needing to do to crack the playoff rotation?
There's nothing that he can do now. This is coach's discretion. He's been dismal at best. You're kind of padding and allowing him a little bit of room to say, to at least save his reputation. But he's been bad on the Toronto Raptors for all intents and purposes. I don't think that it's not within his control anymore. It's Nick Nurse. If he decides to give him the opportunity, then Jeremy Lin better darn well make sure that he plays and tries to deserve a spot come playoff time, because right now he doesn't.
Yeah, so to word that better, what do you think Jeremy Lin needs to do to be effective in the playoffs if he gets an opportunity?
Well, I mean, the thing with all the guys that we're talking about right now is that OG, obviously the tallest and the most length, but there's a favorable attitude in the playoffs to have small ball, and Jeremy Lin would still have a rotation. He's not undersized. He's still able to go in there. He's still able to make an impact. His playmaking would be an asset if he plays with better IQ, because he had a couple of sloppy turnovers in the most recent game that he played as well. He's got to make I don't think he needs to make three-pointer. He doesn't need to make shots. I don't think he's being put out there to be a prolific scorer, but I think his overall game needs to improve, just every single aspect of it. You just need to go out there and be like this, to feel like this is a solid player out on the court, because he's not, just watching him, you don't get that assurity.
Yeah, that's a fair point. See, for Jeremy Lin to be the player that we expect him to be, because he is a three-point shooter. He shoots a very decent percentage, but to be
not on the Raptors.
No, not on the Raptors.
21%.
On the Raptors, he's been extremely poor. But over his career, why we were excited was he's a capable three-point shooter, but he can do other things. But as I mentioned, we saw it in the Jeremy Lin video that we made. The comment section was very, very, very varied in there, because some people are saying that he needs more minutes, more touches, and all that, and some people were saying he shouldn't touch the floor at all. Right? But the thing about Jeremy Lin is we're not going to be able to adjust the offense to play to his strengths. He's not going to be able to be a main guy, pick and roll ball handler, where he's thrived in places like Atlanta and Charlotte. Fred VanVleet and Kyle Lowry, we want the ball to be predominantly in those guys' hands, and when we want plays to be made, it's in Kawhi Leonard's, Marc Gasol, and Pascal Siakam's. We're not going to sacrifice touches to get to Jeremy Lin and get him going a little bit more. So in order for him to be effective, in my opinion, is he's going to have to be able to shoot from three-point percentage at least respectably. 20.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point, all of that. Yeah.
22% is unacceptable, right? He doesn't necessarily need to be a three-point specialist like some people branded for him to be, and I think we kind of overhyped it as well just because of the numbers, but he needs to be respectable, and then he's going to be capable of driving, because a lot of Jeremy Lin apologists are saying that his drives have been blamed on by the refs, and he's getting stopped at the rim because of the refereeing, he's not getting calls. But the thing about Jeremy Lin, the defense is just packing the paint. He's not getting fouled that often. It's just people don't respect his three-point shot, so his drives, which he's usually pretty good at, he's not getting the nice drives that he usually gets over the course of his career. So, I think the key for Lin is just being a respectable shooter. Then the rest of his game could possibly come into form. But the unfortunate thing is for Lin, he came at the end of the season, and, he hasn't gotten much of an opportunity to break the team chemistry, to fix those kind of knots in his game that he's had with the Toronto Raptors. And, we can't let him iron things out in the playoffs. We need to win now. So it's going to be tough for Jeremy Lin to break the rotation, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And now let's glaze through these next two players. We don't want to go too long here. Patrick McCaw, we haven't seen a lot from him. I'm pretty high on Patrick McCaw and OG Anunoby train, just because I think of the consistency factor, the reliability factor. They're both guys that can hit the three. Patrick McCaw has not really been proven that much this season, but he's a 33% from three, and that a 1-for-3 guy, and in a given night, that's you can accept that. And he plays with such high energy. That's what I would really value for the playoffs, and that's the kind of thing that can swing games. That's the kind of thing that's invaluable for an eighth man to have off the bench, because you don't need him to put up 10 points. You need him to contribute something that is going to improve the lineup that's already out there. And then Jody Meeks, I'm just going to let you run away with this one here. You have the opinion that maybe he actually might end up stealing the minutes here and playing come playoff time. You talked at the beginning a little bit about how veteranship and about how playoff experience could be important. Jody Meeks, obviously a guy that's aged in the league, so he should have a little bit to offer and a little bit more sort of mental calmness.
Yeah, certainly. Just to briefly talk about McCaw before I get into Jody Meeks, he's out with that hand injury. I believe it's his thumb. So it's going to be interesting to see if he actually gets some run. Obviously, the Raptors don't leak much on the player's injury status, so he might be completely written off as of now. But I was pretty high on McCaw as well before he went down with injury. But Jody Meeks, he's a guy when we brought in, we signed to the 10-day contract. People weren't super high on, and rightfully so. He's kind of tapered off, as you mentioned, in the league as a kind of veteran that fell out of the league. He's a three-point shooter that didn't shoot the greatest percentage last year, but for the Toronto Raptors, it's a very small sample size, but he's looked extremely great for the Toronto Raptors in the short stretches of minutes that he gets. He's currently shooting 43%. Obviously, now take it with a grain of salt. It's a small sample size, but
he's playing against the worst lineups as well.
Certainly. So it's not. I'm by no means saying that he's a 43% shooter. We need to play him, but he has been good in the opportunities he's gotten, unlike some other players on the roster. So Jody Meeks, and he's a guy. Although he had a down season last year, he's experienced. He's a veteran. You know what you're going to at least get from Jody Meeks, whether it's, he's not going to do anything dumb. And we talked about at the beginning of the pod. At least in my opinion, three-point shooting is going to be key. It's not everything, but three-point shooting is going to be a major key for whoever runs away with these minutes, because we need people that are able to stretch the floor. Even if they aren't putting in a lot of points, as long as they can create spacing for Kawhi Leonard, for Pascal Siakam, for Kyle Lowry, for all these players, the three-point shooting is going to be invaluable, even if they're shooting it or not, right? So we can't have players just sag off in the paint and pack the paint. And I think Jody Meeks, he could potentially be the most reliable three-point shooter off the bench out of the five guys that we mentioned.
It's very possible. It's very possible. I agree with everything that you're saying, but I think he's also probably the least proven defender on the team.
That's fair.
So it's a lot to consider, and I think that Nick Nurse is going to be probably thinking maybe similar, maybe completely different. I'll be interested to hear what the fans and the people in the comment section are saying as well. Ben, how about you finish us off here? A lot of discussion. We broke it down a lot, so I'll applaud you if you've made it this far. But Ben, just to put a final sort of nail on the head here, who would you say right now, of everybody that we've discussed, is leading in your opinion? You've said maybe you're edging towards Jody Meeks. Is that for real? Is your heart set on Jody Meeks being the probable eighth man in the playoff time?
I'm not going to go as far as to say he's the eighth man, but I could see him getting minutes. If I had to put my name on an eighth man, I'd have to go with Norman Powell. Despite the fact he's been a bit inconsistent ever since the beginning of the year, he has had some down games, don't get me wrong, but I think he's been a bit more consistent as the season has gone along. And, he does have up and down games, but I think the peaks you get with Norman Powell outweigh the negatives, especially when compared to these other players. So if I had to go with an 8-man, I'd go with Norman Powell, but don't be surprised if Jody Meeks ends up as the 8th or 9th man in the rotation. I'll throw it back at you. Who's your 8th man and, potential sleeper?
With Patrick McCaw being possibly injured, OG Anunoby for me is a sure shot as the 8th man. Sleeper is Patrick McCaw as well. I'm big on those two guys, but we're obviously going to see what happens come playoff.
So we predicted 4 guys, so obviously Lynn's going to be the 8th man. But anyways, let us know in the comment section below who you guys think is going to be the 8th man. Who do you want to see get minutes for the Toronto Raptors? Do you want to see us go with a long bench, a deep bench, or even just run with 7 players? There's a lot of options Nick Nurse has as we, get to the very meaningful games. You're the best if you make it this far. Check out the Twitter, the Instagram, all that cool stuff. Riker, any last words?
You always seek to me to be profound in the concluding moments. I don't have anything tonight, so thanks for making this far. Check us out on the other stuff, on the other podcast platforms.
We are
Cheers.
on Spotify.
Oh, we are on there.